welcome to the arcade. Let's face it, there is no shortage of amazing titles for Nintendo's most revolutionary console, the Wii. From Super Mario Galaxy to Metroid Prime 3 to Wii Sports, it's just one of those consoles that seems to have an inexhaustible lineup of amazing games. It's a console you could play exclusively for a lifetime, still discovering great games the whole time. While most of the great games for the Wii were developed and published by Nintendo, there's also a ton of amazing third-party titles as well. And this strong combination of first-party titles and third-party titles is one of the things that made the Wii as successful as it was. This may not be that surprising, but there are over 1,200 physical licensed games for the Nintendo Wii. And obviously that doesn't include download-only titles or unlicensed games or anything not reported by Nintendo. That's a lot of games. And with all the amazing games available, it's impossible to catch all the ones that are worth your time. But with that being said, I'd like to present you with a few that I think are worth your time, and that maybe you haven't heard of before. And even if you have, I still think all three of these games are worth revisiting, especially if you're on a budget, being that none of these games cost more than $40. So here we go. Here are some of the most underrated Wii titles that I personally love. Number 1. Lost in Shadow. Lost in Shadow, sometimes called A Shadow's Tale, was developed by Hudson Soft and released for the Wii in 2011. In the opening cinematic of the game, we see a boy at the top of a tower having his shadow severed from him and cast down to the bottom of the tower. The game begins as the player controls the shadow in a 2.5D side-scrolling puzzle platformer style while trying to ascend to the top of the tower and figure out how to reconnect to the boy. You have a fairy companion that helps you along the way, as well as a sword that you can pick up a little bit into the opening act of the game that'll help you defeat the enemies that appear outside and inside of the tower. The idea of this game is that you are literally playing as the shadow, so everything you see in the foreground is just decoration because all that matters is the shadow that is cast. Everything else you can see in front of that has no effect on the boy or his ability to get through the levels. You can also use the fairy, technically a sylph or spangle I think, to change the direction of the light patterns to alter the environment and solve certain puzzles. And there's even more puzzles based on altering the geometry of the inside of the tower to change how the shadows are cast, which also changes how you can progress. Within the different puzzle and platforming sections of the levels, there's typically 3 monitor eyes that you are required to touch in order to unlock the shadow barrier at the end of each level. The graphics of this game are very reminiscent of Team Ico, who made Shadow of the Colossus, Ico, and The Last Guardian. There's a level of detail and smoothness to this game that makes it a real joy to look at. There's not a ton of variety in the environments, but that's okay because the game isn't super long. Not to say there isn't any variety though, as you do get to see outside and inside the tower and the mysterious shadow corridors as well. And the further you go up the tower, the greener the fauna becomes. I could go further in detail about the story, the mysterious tower, and even the shadow itself, but I'd rather not spoil this game for those who still haven't played it yet. And the story isn't even told in a straightforward way either. Most bits of the story you glean from memories that you collect to help you along the way, either with a hint of how to progress or to increase your hit points or both. But the story is really interesting, even if it's kind of vague, and it really stokes your imagination and kind of makes me wish this game would get a sequel or at least a remaster on Switch. The game also has a really fantastic, dark, whimsical, sometimes ambient soundtrack to it that really fits with the style and adds to the experience. Out of everyone who has played and reviewed this game, I'd say it's pretty positive reception overall. An 8.7 user score on Metacritic is pretty much in line with what I would expect, especially considering the praise this game gets online from fans either in forums or in the YouTube comment section of long play videos and reviews of the game. I think anyone who likes Limbo or Journey will probably enjoy this underrated Wii game. Number 2. Deadly Creatures. Deadly Creatures was developed by Rainbow Studios and released for the Wii in 2009. I guess you could call it a third-person action game with some elements of maybe survival horror, although you don't play as any typical video game protagonist. No, you play as a couple of deadly creatures. A tarantula and a scorpion, alternating between the two as the game progresses. When you're exploring the mostly linear world, you can crawl on walls and ceilings, as well as walking on normal ground, so sometimes it can be cool, but sometimes a little disorienting. And that's only for the tarantula, by the way. The scorpion is a little more straightforward. And I think that disorientation comes from the fact that the camera stays locked right behind the character, and I think it would just be cooler if it actually showed the character going upside down instead of making the perspective look like the world itself is turning. Other than that though, the game controls just fine, and there's some fun combos to pull off in the combat against other bugs and creepy crawlers. There's boss fights too, although I won't spoil too much. The quick time events are kind of hit or miss, but mostly fine. And there's a couple of interesting collectibles too, like the grubs and the crickets, which increase your overall hit points. So collecting those has a gameplay incentive, which is a nice touch. Other than the gameplay, the story is what's really intriguing in this one. The spider and the scorpion don't really do anything to interact with the main story, for the most part. You're really just eavesdropping on two human characters that you don't see much of at first, listening to them talk about how there's gold out here in the desert and how they're gonna find it, no matter what. There is some interaction with the player characters and the human characters, but if you get a chance to experience that for yourself without spoilers, please do so because it does not disappoint. This game was decently well received, scoring only one negative review from critics on Metacritic and boasting an 8.4 user score there too. It's a smart game, although a little dated, with a cool story, fun main characters, nice presentation, and overall surprisingly awesome. Check it out if you get the chance. Number 3. Blob. For the last game on the list today, I want to talk about Blob. Blob was developed by Blue Tongue Entertainment and released for the Wii in 2008. It was later ported to other systems as well. It has a small but really dedicated fan base, so you've probably heard of or even played this one or one of the sequels at some point before, but I just had to talk about it. It has such a unique look and feel and just doesn't get talked about enough. The same can be said for the first two games I mentioned as well. Lost in Shadow and Deadly Creatures didn't spawn a franchise, heck neither of them even got a single sequel. But Blob is a little different. It did start a new franchise, but it just feels like the franchise kind of died off after Splatoon became a thing. Which is a real shame because they aren't really all that similar in gameplay, although you could say that they're pretty similar in concept. Blob is a pretty simple game, pretty easily picked up and understood by casual or hardcore gamers, and doesn't offer a ton in the way of challenge. But what it lacks in difficulty, it makes up for in atmosphere and pure fun. So you play as the Blob, who can absorb different paint colors and use them to colorize everything inside of the levels, which are all based around this city of Chroma. Chroma City was overtaken by Inked, an evil corporation that drained Chroma City of all its color and creativity. So you collect different colors, paint the levels and everything in them, complete puzzling challenges, and free the Radiants from the oppression of Inked. You also transform certain landmarks or other technological constructs created by Inked to take over it and deactivate it. I didn't discover Blob until about 3 years ago, and that kind of sucks because it's exactly the kind of game I would have loved to play back when I first got my Wii. I still love it, even though I discovered it much later than most people. But yeah, this definitely would have been way up on my list of favorite Wii games, even back when I first started digging into the Wii's library. Lost in Shadow and Deadly Creatures both had little to no marketing that I can remember. Lost in Shadow was a gift from a friend, and I'd never even heard of it before. And Deadly Creatures was a last-minute pickup from Blockbuster because of how cheap it was when they were shutting down. And like I said before, Blob actually did manage to jumpstart a franchise, but that franchise hasn't done much outside of porting Blob 1 and 2 to more recent platforms. No talks of a sequel that I'm aware of. And I really think that's a shame because all three of these games go so unnoticed to this day. In my opinion, they are some really standout titles with fun and unique gameplay and concepts that really set them apart from a lot of other games the Wii has to offer. These games and a ton of other underrated Wii games need more recognition for being such unique and passionate and fun games. I hope you get a chance to try out at least one of these games for yourself, and if you do, or if you already have, let me know about it in the comments below. You can find all these games pretty easily on eBay. Lost in Shadow is around $40, Deadly Creatures is about $15 or $20, and Blob only about $6. Before eBay though, I'd recommend checking for these at your local game store. So that's my list. Lost in Shadow is a side-scrolling puzzle game similar to games like Limbo, but with a unique gimmick. Deadly Creatures is a mix of action and exploration and survival, but with a perspective that you may not have seen coming. And Blob is a 3D puzzle platformer with unique gameplay mechanics and a vibrant atmosphere. All three of these are fantastic games that are absolutely worth your time. It can be really fun to dive into unexplored territory for a console as popular as the Wii. And finding those hidden gems and underrated games really makes you feel a special connection to not only those games, but also the console itself. And there are probably a ton of other underrated Wii games out there that I missed. So I'd love to hear from you. Please let me know what you think are the most underrated Wii games in the comments section below, and thank you so much for watching.